Hello, and welcome to TechFunnel.com's interview series for Women's History Month. My name is Danny White, and today we have joining us Gia Min. Gia is a senior leadership consultant at Canadian Tire. She manages the delivery of national leadership programs, including design, scheduling, marketing, and analysis of results. Previously, she was the head data scientist and head IO psychologist at Ideal.com, an AI platform for recruitment. Gia has a master's in industrial organizational psychology and is proud to be published on ERE, Analytics in HR, and Greenhouse, as well as featured on CBC, Financial Times, Forbes, and Wired. Welcome, Gia. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you navigate life as a successful woman who was previously in tech and now in leadership development consulting.
Yeah, so my journey into tech was a little maybe more circuitous than most. So I did a master's in industrial organizational psychology. So, most people, when they get that degree, they go into an IO consultancy or management consulting, or they do more internal consulting for companies, which is currently what I'm doing now. So, but when I graduated, there was a role that an opportunity that popped up at a brand new startup that was looking for an industrial psychologist because they were creating an assessment to help companies hire. So they found me, and we worked together to create this assessment to help companies hire with the purpose of getting a less biased hiring process, as well as really trying to help companies hire more productive employees pre-hire. So as much information as you can gather about employees before you actually interview and hire them.
Right.
So the idea is that you reduce error, you reduce bias, and you eventually you want to end up with more productive employees that are performing well and happier because they fit well into your company culture. So that was sort of the mandate of that job. And so I was, the research analyst, and then promoted to head data scientist, and then got another title change as the head IO psych. But then I have now transitioned to the senior leadership consultant role currently, which is, quite a change because I'm now at a big corporation. And I was previously at like a 10-person startup. So
Gotcha.
It's I really enjoy what I do because, I think we all have examples of what good leaders look like and maybe what a bad leader looks like. I mean, I was actually on public transit the other day and I overheard the driver complain about their micromanager to his coworker. And she was saying, he's getting yelly. And he said, that's what they want to do. They want to control us. And her reply was, very interesting because she said, I don't mind that they want control, but if you want to control me, you should be nice to me. If you yell at me, I won't listen to you. And, that's basically leadership development 101 right there.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, this is for me, such a, as I have the psychology background. And so just understanding people and what makes good leaders and what makes essentially the qualities that make a good leader are usually what actually makes someone a good person. So it's all just very interesting. And I enjoy what I do because the idea is that you're helping create these better leaders, creating better workplaces, and then also creating happier employees. So it's all kind of positive and happy.
Awesome. So a kind of off the cuff question that we didn't pre-plan for, but you have, like I do, have a psychology background. How have you seen your psychology background and education play a role in how you handle people and how you even get things done in your different work environments? Like you were at a startup first and now you're at a big corporation. How has that helped you to manage and lead in those different roles?
Yeah, I think having a psych background is almost like having a secret superpower, you have all this knowledge that you actually think is pretty obvious, but if you haven't learned it and been educated in it, it's actually completely new to most people.
Completely new, yeah.
So when I was in a tech, it's interesting because when I was at the tech startup, there's tons of tech startups doing what we were doing, but they didn't have subject matter expertise. So they didn't understand things like adverse impact when it comes to hiring. They didn't understand things like unconscious bias. So they were very data driven in their modeling. So they'd say, whatever predicts the best, like whatever model predicts the best hires is the right model to these sort of engineers and like data scientists who don't necessarily have a psych background. But then, like we know that there's, the sort of classic example is if you look at one of the big predictors of quitting or turnover is distance, commuting distance. So, if you just looked at that, didn't understand the context, you'd say we should only hire people who live a certain amount away from that location. But then if you look at the data, understand the context, you actually know distance from work is a proxy variable for things like socioeconomic status.
Correct.
So generally, people who are farther away from sort of like the downtown locations tend to have lower socioeconomic status. So, now are you now discriminating against certain demographics? So, that's just like an example of like you want to optimize your model versus like understanding the context of recruiting and hiring, which I think like for me as an industrial organizational psychologist, that's very obvious to me. But for someone who doesn't have that background, like that's very new to them. Right.
Correct.
So, and like, it's interesting because some tech companies recognize this problem. And instead of discriminating, what they do, like, for example, Facebook realizes that most of their employees like lived a distance away. So they're like, okay, we're just going to build an office that's closer to our employees. So like, so they like companies have like interesting ways of creating solutions for that.
Correct.
But yeah, if you didn't know that and you didn't have a subject matter expert who can understand, because that's sort of like what data and data science and this whole like movement towards being data based. There's actually a big push now to include social scientists, because of the fact that we have this knowledge about the context, the social context, and about relationships, and you can optimize models, but if people don't understand them or they reject the models, then they're useless.
Definitely. So having that background knowledge and being able to create those models based upon that information and data is very important.
Yeah, for sure. And there is a difference, of course, between like I can have all the knowledge in the world about like what's a good leader and like emotional intelligence, but you still have to practice. Right? Like
Absolutely.
Every day it's like putting those into practice.
Yeah.
Like you can know things in theory, but it's still like constant. Like how do I regulate your emotions at work? How do I, like sort of resolve conflict or by, restore myself from like a negative experience.
Experience. Absolutely.
Like you could have the knowledge, but if you don't have the practice, then, but having the knowledge in the first place, for sure, as a psychology major and background,
absolutely
definitely does feel like you have this tool set.
This toolbox. Yeah. So even one of my professors actually told me that everything sounds great in theory until you put it in practice that the real things come out. So, so having worked in with a recruiting software startup for several years and having that knowledge and information at your disposal, particularly in artificial intelligence, what would you consider to be just the biggest impact of women climbing the ladder, whether it's at a startup company or even in a corporation?
So I think if your question is sort of like how can women make the biggest impact or like create or what has it, I actually think moving towards a more data-based or outcome-based sort of performance system or performance way of measuring is or metric-based system is like, for me, more equalizing. So the idea is that, it doesn't really matter if I'm a man or a woman, if I produce, like if we both produce, successful,
the same amount of work,
output, then like that's right. So I think there's still a lot of subjectivity though, in terms of who you think you get along with. Like, people have certain preconceptions of like, they'd rather work with a man versus a woman. They'd rather have, there is some data, actually there's a lot of data showing that, female people prefer female leaders or like work better with female leaders. But then there's sort of the emotional or subjective perception of that and whether that's true, like for the individual. So I think the biggest impact is like, just being kind of more data driven, trying to be more objective, trying to be more outcome driven. I actually think it's one of those things where diversity attracts diversity. So,
Absolutely.
it's really hard to be like the only woman or the first woman in a company.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then as soon as you get one, you get a second one, or it doesn't matter. Like, let's not say woman, let's say any minority. Right? As soon as you get one, you get another one. And now your company, like, you wake up and you say, oh, my company is like legitimately diverse. That it reflects sort of the population.
Correct.
And like, sometimes that's organic because, again, you can sort of attract, those demographics as you become more diverse. And sometimes you have to force it a little where you say, we want to be a diverse company. What can we do about how can we make sure our recruiting and our interview processes are bias free? Are we really tapping into the full talent pool? Or are we only just kind of using referrals? Our referrals tend to look like us. So, there's I think just really pushing like the objectivity and then kind of showing like when you do that and when you are more database, you're more successful. Like that's the
okay. So kind of like that intentional diversity and inclusion company wide is quite helpful.
Right. And I think, I can't really speak for other companies, but if there is a culture of where maybe if you're a female employee and you feel you have to be more careful about speaking up or speaking your mind. I think companies are getting better at cultivating cultures where you can be just more assertive or more, like you don't have to be as, women have to do the thing where you're like, I have to seem warm, but I also have to seem confident. So I think there is a bit more, I'm I don't know, maybe I'm naive, but there's a bit more acceptance of the fact that you can speak up and like share your opinions and share your facts and like you will be heard. So, I mean, there's still obviously more work to do, but it does seem like that's that it's moving there. So.
Right. It does seem like progress has been made over the last couple of years. And indeed, like workplace diversity and inclusion have been included in that discussion at length from both sides, both men and women and, different races. So what are your views on the subject overall?
So I think it's still top of mind. It always seems to make like HR trends of the year. Every year it's on the list. I know like the new one is diversity, inclusion and belongingness.
Yes.
So, I think there is this sort of like a little bit of a fatigue in terms of like demographic diversity. People sort of understand that and sort of like we've been told over and over, like we need to be more demographically diverse. I think like people do have the best intentions, but like they want to be inclusive, have an inclusive workplace. They don't maybe not always know what that means. I don't know. I think trying to become more aware of biases and eliminating biases and just figuring out your processes to try to eliminate biases, I think is the way to go. Because like we've already had so much education on like why diversity matters, why inclusion matters. Like we've shown data set after data set of like diverse companies actually outperform. Yes, so like if that's not compelling people to change, then like we need to figure out actually changing processes and systems. Again, as a psychologist, we know like person versus situation. So let's keep changing the situation to like just optimize. Hiring and retention and promoting in terms of like, and it's not even like, let's give people additional benefits. It's like, let's make sure like the best candidates and the best people are getting hired and promoted.
Right.
And like, we're actually removing as much subjectivity from that as possible.
Having that equal playing field. Definitely. So what are some ways that technology is changing talent acquisition and, speaking of bias, eliminating overall bias in that process?
It's an ongoing process. And, like this is such a systematic problem that there's no like silver bullet. So I think like not even technology, but like the first simple step that most companies will do is even like even big companies like Uber, like their first thing was like, we're going to remove names from resumes. Right. That's even like almost like a manual process, right? To have someone remove the names. So it won't trigger potential like stereotypes to read the name.
Mm-hmm.
I think technology is helping, a lot of companies, like including Ideal, are pushing their technology to help reduce bias in terms of, what makes a good candidate? Like what is going to make the best employee? It's sort of like their skill set, personality traits, like motivation. And like, that's not going to be correlated with any type of demographic. So let's see like what it is on their resumes or what it says on their assessments that is showing those traits. I think using those sort of like more empirical sort of database and research-based methods to hire, if more companies can adopt that and like buy into it, you are going to eliminate so much of the bias, because we know that's true. Like we already know from data sets that companies that use personality assessments are more racially diverse.
Absolutely.
And the problem is that HR often has the opposite perception. They think using these assessments are discriminatory. So they will stay away from them.
Right.
So like, it's sort of like a marketing uphill battle to be like, no, using the assessment, it's a good thing. It's more objective. Like it does seem to slowly be, like I'm looking at the data from like SHRM, and they say like more and more companies are starting to use assessment. So it's like every year, companies are, and at the end of the day, it also just makes their life easier, right? Like, instead of trying to subjectively judge someone's personality, like give them an assessment, see what they're, try to measure it objectively.
Cool. So how do you empower the women on your team? And maybe this can also be, how do you empower just diverse teams in general to be more productive, to collaborate more, to work together well on the same team, things like that?
I'm going to sort of answer this like a step back in terms of like, how do you empower people in general or teams in general? Okay. I think oftentimes like teams become a little too siloed. Possibly you have a team dynamic where you're not necessarily encouraged to be collaborative. Or you have like maybe a culture of not necessarily being able to share what you really think. So, there's like, like lots of
variables,
cultures and team cultures like that often comes from top bottom, right? So, it really does determine like what your managers, like how they behave and how they act. And like how they punish or reward certain behaviors is going to be how the employees will behave. So, it really does, unfortunately, need to come top bottom. But, once you can establish a culture of sort of like openness, transparency, safeness, like you're safe to make a mistake. You're safe to make a mistake. You can admit it. And then correct it. And then you can now have like top bottom up communication.
Okay.
I think like the smartest managers are the ones who are recognized like, my employees have great ideas, they can execute well. So like, why wouldn't I take advantage of that? Because, the first rule of sort of like a manager or a good leader is your performance is going to be based and on your team's performance. On the team's performance, so, It's no longer based on your individual contributions. It's how your team performs. So those are like the smart managers who get it. Right. So I think, in terms of empowering people in general, like just making them creating a culture or an environment of safety, like psychological safety to admit mistakes, to want to work together. Like it's not a zero-sum game. It shouldn't be competitive. Some people like competition, so I don't know, like other things. For me, what I like is being collaborative, being very open. When I make a mistake, I admit to it. Like it's for me, that's what works for me. I guess in other cultures or other teams, like maybe that's wouldn't work. Right. But like for me, I think these are best practices, and what I see has worked, and it seems to make the most happiest and most cohesive teams.
Awesome. Speaking of competition and collaboration on technology, the technology industry itself is a very competitive industry. So how do you suggest people balance that competitiveness with cooperation and collaboration?
Do you mean like intercompany or intracompany?
Intercompany.
I'm not sure. I mean, people are, it is like our tech company or tech industry is very competitive. It's often winner takes all. I'm not sure you can necessarily foster senses of collaboration amongst that, but you can definitely, what I would say is find partnerships with complementary companies. So that happens a lot in tech, where you find partners, you find companies that want to work with you because you're complementary. So like that happens all the time in startups and tech. It doesn't seem to happen so much in the corporate world. I don't know. I don't know. Of course, corporations are too big. They don't. But yeah, for sure. There's like, when I was at Ideal, we had like tons of collaboration with companies that we were not in competition with, but we, offered products that, the same target audience could use.
Right.
So, yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, like sometimes people like the competition because like there is this interesting concept in startups and technology where you actually want competitors because now you've created a market.
Right.
If you are the only person in that category, you're actually, it's such an uphill battle because now you're trying to convince people you need a product. But when there's like 5 other companies or 10 other companies that are doing exactly what you're doing or doing similar to what you're doing.
Something similar, yeah.
Now your target audience is, this is a real product. Like this is something I might need. So yeah, like competition actually is welcome. It actually helps you out. But at one point, do you want to then collaborate with each other is more, I haven't seen that too often actually.
Right. Okay. So what is the best advice you have ever received?
So the best advice I've ever received was recently from a friend of mine who said, don't separate your work life from your personal life in terms of not like be a workaholic, but, don't think of like you have a 9 to 5 and then my real life starts after that. Think of it like what you're doing is part of you and how you spend your day at work is part of you and you're expressing yourself and you are like, it's meaningful for you or a source of joy for you or source of enjoyment for you. And so it doesn't feel like now that I'm out of the office or at home, I can like be myself. Right.
Awesome.
So I think again, cause I'm lucky cause like I'm in psychology, I'm in IO psychology, so I'm doing exactly what I've trained for and what I wanted to do. So like, I just know I have the luxury of like doing work that doesn't necessarily feel like work. Like I find it very fun and like stimulating. I don't know what other people do when maybe there's more of a disconnect. I think, there is that research on like job crafting, like finding joy and meaning in your job. I think again, if you have a psychology background, you almost have like the superpower because you know sort of how to do that.
Yeah, all the mind games and everything.
Right.
Yeah.
So, like sometimes people get a little, I find like some of my friends will get a little like almost depressed about their job. They'll say like, my only purpose here is to make the company more money. I'm like, okay, I could say everyone can say that, of course.
Yeah.
Right? But, you have to find that deeper meaning where you say, well, like an ideal would be, I was helping companies hire better employees and in a less biased way.
Absolutely.
So for me, that was very meaningful. Here, I would say I'm helping creating better managers, which will improve company culture, produce more successful employees, and again, at the end of the day, make more money. So like,
that's a byproduct of making money is a byproduct of what you're meaningfully doing. Yeah.
And luckily, we know that happier employees make more money. It's not the opposite, right? Where you say like, we have to make people miserable and they'll work harder and like, they'll make us more money. It's the opposite.
It's the opposite.
Make people happy and then they work harder and then they make you more money.
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, I would say that was the best piece of advice.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jia, for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. Guys, thanks for listening to this interview. For these and other interviews and topics, please visit techfunnel.com. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram, and subscribe to our weekly newsletter so you can stay up to date on what's happening in the industry.